Hello, welcome to Sound and Fury Book Reviews. As usual, I am Tina. Today I'm doing a book review of The Coming of the Terrans by Lee Brackett from 1967. The cover is just kind of out there and I love it. So this is a book from Ace Books. It's a classic sci-fi. Obviously that means it's going to be getting my classic sci-fi bingo treatment and we'll see if it gets a bingo. So first, my non-spoiler review. A ponderous, almost melancholy collection of related but distinct stories, The Coming of the Terrans breaches ideas of colonialism. What is it about? Lee Brackett's Mars. A dying planet, dried up and hostile, a planet of countless years and countless mysteries. When the Terrans came, they found a world of dead sea bottoms, lost civilizations, and secretive tribes bitterly resenting their intrusion on the fading glory of an ancient planet. The Earthmen looked down upon the crumbling ruins of brilliant culture and laughed at the stories of invincible gods and forgotten magic lingering in the forbidden cities of Jankara, Barakesh, Volkis. They would not laugh for long. Ooh. One of the most fun things about this novel, reading it 56 years after it was published, of course, is how the novel is set in 1998, 2016, 2024, 2031, and then 2038. It's kind of funny to think that we're closer to the last setting than even the first one. Nothing about what she assumed Mars was like is obviously true. I often forget that when these books were written, the science we knew about our solar system was next to nothing. People back then honestly had no real way of knowing whether there was or wasn't life on Mars. Imagine living in a world where there was a possibility that aliens were as close as the next planet over. It's so much fun. So much, very optimistic actually too. Anyway, the gist of this novel posits that there is life and ecology on Mars and that we Terrans colonized it and wiped out most of their customs and people. The most realistic thing about this novel is this idea. In truth, the collection is a little slow, and because each story features a different main character and a very minimal cohesion of plot, it's not the most engaging. The stories themselves are interesting, but feel more like a short story collection than an actual novel. It's also unfortunate, for me anyway, that for having 5 stories, none feature women main characters. In fact, women are barely in the story. I wonder if this is the case because Brackett was writing to the market, the target market at the time being men, whom either would not want to read about a female MC, or whom the publishers perhaps believed would want to read about one, or because Brackett was more affected by the culture of patriarchy she lived within than other writers. I don't know. I find it fascinating to consider, so don't get your boxers in a twist thinking I'm tearing the book down by saying it lacks women. It's a time period thing, I realize that, but I also find it interesting to think why this was the case, to kind of like look deeper into why these things were happening. Anyway, the ideas in the book are interesting. The first story deals with a man given a drug that turns him into some sort of raving, de-evolved version of humans. The second was the most interesting to me, about a man trying to save a child from ritualistic murder. And the last 3 deal with this mystical city called Shadowcore, before, during, and post its collapse. There is also a seriousness to the novel and what I felt was a real critique of colonialism, though when I get into my sci-fi bingo, I kind of unpack that a little more, and it's not as, I don't know, I have interesting ideas about it. At least I think they're interesting. You guys are probably like, oh my god. Unfortunately, it just wasn't zany enough for me, and none of the main characters were particularly likable, and they were all kind of the same. Obviously, it's not a bad novel, but its dated science and lack of diversity distract from the argument it's trying to make. So, if you like ponderous short story style classic sci-fi, you will enjoy this. If you like interesting covers, if you're obsessed with the planet Mars and its various depictions over the years, then you might like this as well. I mean, yeah, it's not a bad book at all. It's just like not my favorite classic sci-fi. So, I think Lee Brackett's, what is it called? The Day After Tomorrow? No, that's something else. The Long Tomorrow. I like that one much better than this one. Anyway, so on to my classic sci-fi bingo. As usual, there are spoilers in this. There are spoilers for everything about the book, because I'm going to dive into it. I basically use the bingo chart as a way to kind of like jump into discussions of various parts of the book. So here we go. Outdated science. Yes, the fact that there is life on Mars is a big one. Also, a guy writes a check at one point. It made me wonder how currency works between the worlds. Like, if he's writing a check, like, obviously I don't have electronic e-transfer or anything. So do they cart, like, physical money back and forth from Earth to Mars? I was just so interested to see in how that would work, because that is so funny to me. I think it's like a spaceship that's in one of those Brinks trucks or whatever. Another thing that they have for outdated science is record players. I mean, I have a record player, but I'm assuming she means this as like the main form of music listening as opposed to just listening to Spotify on your phone. So I'm going to say that's outdated for sure. And there's also this line that makes no sense because Mars doesn't have a gravitational field like Earth. Obviously, Racket would have no way of knowing that, but it's still outdated science, and it's kind of fun. There was a compass on the dash, a necessity in the place that had no roads and no landmarks. Fraser kept the needle centered, setting a course as though with a ship. Time and sand rolled on, and he was tired. I feel you on that, being tired. Next one, spaceship blows up. Nope, no spaceships in this one. Predicting social changes? Honestly, no. Nothing about how Earth is run is really different from today socially. It's mainly, and the book is mainly about Mars societies, so that doesn't really count. In fact, it seems like society, even in the solar system, is the same as on Earth. From the first page, you get Via on Venus, New York on Earth, Sun City and Mercury's twilight belt, and the glassite refuges of the outer worlds, they were all alike. They were dedicated to the coddling of wealth and greed, little paradises where millions were made and lost in comfort, where men and women from all over the solar system could expand their feverish energies without regard for such annoyances as weather and gravitation. So yeah, it seems like all we're interested in is making money, which is pretty much what we're like now, unfortunately. So the next one, sexy female scientists. No, there's no sexy female ladies in this one. Cool aliens. No, the Mars aliens are pretty much like us. And suddenly there passed close by me a man with golden skin and unmartian black eyes and a facial structure that belonged to no race I knew. I had seen the carven faces of fauns that were a little like it. So basically they look like elves. And then there's another one that was like, his skull was narrow and arched, and the shaping of the bones was very fine. On that skull was a covering of short, curling fibers that had an almost metallic luster in the moonlight, silvery and bright. So basically just like sparkly versions of us. I don't know. So, alien-human romance, though. Yes, but it's gross. So a grown man, you know what's coming, has an intimate relationship with what is presumably a young teenager. She acts like she's about 14. Here's some proof about that. I kissed her. She drew back and gave me a startled look from those black, brilliant eyes, and suddenly I stopped thinking that she was a child, and I forgot that she was not human, and I didn't care. Okay, fine, all right. Maybe she's not a child because she's an alien. Maybe she's not. But then he's talking to her and he says, Duani, you're a child. You've only a child's way of thought. Forget the past and think of tomorrow. So, yeah. Problematic? Disgusting. What the fuck? Why was she this age? Why, Lee? Why? Why not just make her a regular adult? I don't understand why this needed to be part of the story. There's no repercussions from this. The fact that she's 14, the same things would have happened if she was 24. I don't know. Gross. Gross. So, onwards. Generation ship. Actually, you know what? You're not getting a check mark for that because it's gross. That's not a romance. That is assault. And I'm taking your check mark away. Onwards. Generation ship, no. Space soldiers, no. AI robots, no. New worlds, yes. Mars, obviously. Cyberpunk, no. Sexism. So, it's not so much sexism, so I'm not giving it a check mark. Because it's not really sexism, it's just there's a lack of women in the story. There are like 4 or 5. There's Jill, the first MC's fiancé, who needs rescuing. There's a child, there's another child, there's someone's wife, then a witch. And some half-naked women, you know, for the men to ogle, of course. So they don't really add to the plot. They don't really do anything for the story. Even the child in the second book, the one that is escaping ritualistic murder, she doesn't do anything. Her mother drops her off. Buddy tries to save her. I guess she does leave in the end. That was her decision, but still, like, it's not like she's 7 years old. I don't know. Also, the one thing that, it didn't really drive me crazy because this is an old book, but it was always Earthmen this, Earthmen that, which is odd because the title calls them Terrans. So why wasn't the title The Coming of the Earthmen instead? I don't know, because they never used Terrans, like, barely at all in the story, so they just used Earthmen, and I was like, why even call it Coming of the Terrans then? Anyway. Next, Forerunner technology. Yes, there's lots of Forerunner technology. Shadikar is basically a preserved Forerunner technology city. There's a bunch of, like, kind of, it's preserved in a way. It's kind of confusing. I don't really know how to explain it. I'm not going to try. You guys can read it for yourselves if you're interested. But there is one, I'm just going to use an example of one of the various things that is explained in this book as foreigner technology. That prism is one of the jewels of Shanga. The wise men of the Cairdu carved them 500,000 years ago. Only they knew the secret of the substance and the shaping of the facets. There are only 3 of the jewels left. So there are like things like this kind of dotted all over Mars, because the idea is that Mars has been around for like 1,000,000 years or something, like colonized or inhabited for 1,000,000 years by these people whose culture has slowly died away. I thought that was fascinating. I wish we'd gotten more of that. You just have kind of the one city, and it's not like super in depth. It's more about the Earthmen, the Terrans, than the Mars people. And I really wish we would have like perspective with like one of the Mars characters kind of explaining this a bit more, because it's not really explained in any detail. It's kind of just info dumped in a short paragraph, and then you're just left to kind of remember that, I guess. Next one, LGBTQ+. So there's a funny line, at least I found it funny. Back on Earth, he went at once to his analyst. He was quite honest with him, and the analyst was able to show him exactly what had happened. The whole affair had been a sex fantasy induced by drugs, with the priestess a mother image. The eye which looked at him then and which still peered unwinking out of his reoccurring dreams was symbolic of the female generative principle, and the feeling of horror it aroused in him was due to the guilt complex he had because he was a latent homosexual. Selden was enormously comforted. There's so much to unpack in that one paragraph. It does seem like Selden is happy to find out he's been closeted by himself. So I guess there's representation, because he's not like, oh my god, I'm gay. He's just like, oh good. But that explains a lot. I mean, Sadie had to go to therapy to determine that he was gay. But given the age bracket was writing in, this was likely the norm. I'm surprised and happy they didn't give him electroshock therapy or something once he discovered this about himself. So at least she's positing a world where I guess people were, you know, a queer normative world, hopefully. Anyway, I thought that was interesting. And yeah, I guess it gets a check mark for representation because we have Selden, and yeah, I guess. Portals? No, there's no portals. Microfiche. So a micro book is mentioned at one point, and while this could be some sort of Kindle, I'm tempted to believe it's based on microfiche tech versus cloud-based or downloadable formatted ebooks. So I'm giving a check mark to microfiche because I love the microfiche. Male MC is a dick. Generally, these dudes are fine, but I'm giving this a check mark for how Frasier in Book 2 administers corporal punishment on a 7-year-old repeatedly, which definitely makes you a dick. He does it out of anger, too, not to wake her up or something. And, of course, the statutory rape the other MC performs also makes you quite a dick. So, yes, 2 out of 5 of the MCs in this book are a dick, and that's enough for a check mark for me, because what they do is quite egregious. Racial equality? Nope. As far as I could tell, all the MCs were white. The story was clearly arguing against colonialism, so that's why it was so weird to me that none of the characters were people of color. But then again, maybe that was also kind of the point. Like, there's a line here. Where was it? It flagged. He shivered, feeling the enormous weight of a history in which he and his had no part whatsoever, and it came to him that he had perhaps been just the tiniest bit presumptuous in his desire to teach these people. Maybe that's the point. Maybe all the MCs are white because it's a colonial story. Maybe that's also why there are no women in this, you know, as main characters either. Like, maybe Brackett was trying to make the argument that Pocahontas' dad in the Disney version we're making, you know, that white men are dangerous. I mean, this argument, though, does discount the colonialism of other countries by other peoples in our human history, you know, Japan over Korea, things like that. But at least it's a critique of colonialism in general. So, interesting. Then again, the second story features a white savior narrative, so maybe I'm giving it too much credit. I just find it really interesting to kind of, this is what I find interesting about these books, especially really smart ones like Lee Brackett's, where there's clearly an argument to be made. It's just interesting to look at the argument, you know, almost 60 years later and be like, is the argument still stand? Is it as robust as it could have been, or was there the opportunity for it to be as robust as it was? I don't know. I find it really fascinating. So yeah. The next one, plasma or future weapons. Not really. There's no post-apocalypticness. I mean, Shandakor is kind of post-apocalyptic, but it's not post-apocalyptic in the sense that it's like, you know, run down and stuff. It's just like an abandoned city. No bounty hunters, no galactic war. Tech similar to today. Yes, they have electric cars. I was like, whoa, okay. That's great. And does it pass the Bechdel test? No, it does not. So yeah, that's the coming of the Terrans for you. If it sounded interesting to you, check it out if you can find it somewhere. I obviously found it at a used bookstore, and I bought it solely for the cover because the cover is hilarious. Yeah, so thanks for watching, and let me know in the comments what you think.